Most people believe the worst moment of betrayal is the moment you discover the truth. They imagine that once the secret is exposed, the pain reaches its highest point. But that isn't always how it happens. Sometimes the discovery is only the beginning. Sometimes the truth arrives in pieces, and each new piece hurts more than the last. As Savannah Hartwell sat frozen inside that restaurant, staring at the photograph on her phone, she wasn't just looking at her husband and her best friend. She was looking at 20 years of memories and wondering how many of them had been real. Every anniversary dinner, every family vacation, every holiday gathering, every moment when Harper Bennett sat across from her at a table, smiling and laughing as if nothing was wrong. Every moment when Grayson Hartwell kissed her goodbye before work and promised he loved her. Suddenly those memories no longer felt comforting. They felt suspicious. They felt incomplete. And the worst part was that Savannah had absolutely no idea how long she had been living inside a story that wasn't what it appeared to be. The message contained no explanation, no demand, no threat, no additional information, just the photograph and a sentence telling her she deserved to know the truth. Savannah looked around the restaurant as if the sender might somehow be watching her from another table. Every face suddenly seemed unfamiliar. Every conversation felt distant. For several minutes, she simply sat there trying to convince herself there had to be another explanation. Maybe the image was old. Maybe it was edited. Maybe Grayson had met Harper for some innocent reason. Maybe there was some misunderstanding so ridiculous and unlikely that she would laugh about it later. Human beings are remarkable when it comes to protecting themselves from pain. We often search for impossible explanations because the truth is too painful to accept. Savannah wanted desperately to believe she was understanding what she saw. Then her phone vibrated again. A second message appeared. This time there was no photograph, only an address. The address belonged to the hotel shown in the first image. Beneath it was a room number, and beneath that was a single sentence. "They're still there." Savannah felt her stomach tighten. The room around her seemed smaller. The restaurant staff continued moving from table to table, unaware that one woman's entire life was collapsing in silence. Across the dining room, couples celebrated birthdays and anniversaries. Friends laughed over cocktails. Business partners shook hands over expensive dinners. Nobody noticed the woman sitting alone in front of untouched champagne while staring at a message that had changed everything. Years later, Savannah would describe that moment as the longest 10 minutes of her life. Not because she knew what to do, but because she knew she could never return to the person she had been before receiving that photograph. Whether she chose to investigate or ignore it, her life had already changed. Before we go deeper into this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. What makes this story extraordinary isn't simply the affair itself. Affairs happen every day. Relationships fail. Marriages end. Friendships break apart. What makes this story different is what Savannah discovered after she decided to find out whether the photograph was real. Because when she finally left the restaurant and drove toward that hotel, she believed she was about to uncover a secret that had been hidden for a few months, maybe a year at most. What she didn't know was that the truth stretched much further into the past than she could possibly imagine. It reached into family gatherings, business decisions, vacations, celebrations, conversations she thought she remembered clearly. It reached into nearly every part of her life, and someone, somewhere had finally decided that she needed to see it for herself. The drive across the city felt unreal. Savannah later admitted she remembered almost nothing about the journey. She remembered traffic lights changing colors. She remembered gripping the steering wheel so tightly her hands hurt. She remembered checking her phone every few minutes, hoping Grayson would call and somehow explain everything. But the call never came. Neither did a text message. Neither did an apology. The silence itself began telling a story. Because if Grayson had truly been delayed by work, he would have called. If he had been stuck in traffic, he would have called. If he had remembered that his wife was waiting alone at a restaurant on their 20th anniversary, he would have called. Yet the silence continued. And with every passing minute, Savannah felt the possibility of innocence slipping further away. When she arrived at the hotel parking lot, she remained inside her car for several minutes. The building stood brightly illuminated against the night sky. Luxury vehicles filled the parking area. Guests entered through revolving glass doors carrying luggage and shopping bags. Everything appeared normal, ordinary. Yet somewhere inside that building was either confirmation of her worst fear or proof that she was making a terrible mistake. Savannah thought about turning around. She thought about driving home and pretending none of this had happened. She thought about calling Grayson and demanding answers over the phone. She thought about calling Harper, but another thought kept returning. If she walked away now, she would spend the rest of her life wondering what was waiting behind that hotel room door. So she stepped out of the car and began walking toward the entrance. At that moment, Savannah still believed she was searching for answers. She had no idea she was walking toward a truth that would eventually lead to divorce papers, court records, hidden accounts, family wars, and a revenge plan so carefully executed that even years later people still debate whether what she did was justified, because the hotel room was only the beginning. The real secret had been hidden for years. Savannah stepped through the hotel lobby, feeling as though she were moving through someone else's life. The polished marble floors reflected the warm lights overhead. Couples crossed the lobby carrying shopping bags and room keys. A family checked in near the front desk. Nobody knew that a woman had just arrived carrying a photograph that threatened to destroy her marriage. She followed the directions from the anonymous message toward the elevators. Every step felt heavier than the one before. The room number replayed inside her head, like a warning she could no longer ignore. By the time the elevator doors opened onto the correct floor, Savannah's heart was beating so hard she could hear it. The hallway seemed endless. Then she saw the room. The door was not fully closed. A thin line of light escaped into the hallway. She approached carefully. Voices drifted through the opening. Familiar voices, comfortable voices. The kind of voices shared by people who had spent a great deal of time together. And in that moment, before she even looked inside, Savannah already knew the photograph had been real. When she finally saw them, she felt something unexpected. There was anger, yes. There was heartbreak. There was disbelief. But there was also clarity. Grayson and Harper were not acting like two people meeting in secret for the first time. They moved around each other with the ease of people who had rehearsed this routine countless times. The shock on their faces wasn't that they had been discovered. The shock was seeing Savannah standing there. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. The truth was sitting in the room between them. Savannah expected Grayson to deny everything. She expected Harper to start crying. Instead, they looked terrified. That fear told her more than any confession ever could. Without raising her voice, without creating a scene, Savannah turned around and walked away. Grayson called after her. Harper followed her into the hallway. Neither of them could stop her. And as the elevator doors closed, Savannah made a decision that would shape everything that followed. She wasn't going to confront them that night. She wasn't going to demand explanations. She was going to learn the entire truth first. The next morning, Grayson returned home carrying flowers and excuses. He claimed the hotel meeting had been a misunderstanding. He insisted nothing inappropriate had happened. He blamed business discussions, bad timing, and appearances. Savannah listened quietly. For the first time in 20 years, she watched her husband lie directly to her face while knowing every word was false. What didn't realize was that Savannah had already begun investigating. The anonymous messages continued arriving. Whoever was sending them seemed to know details nobody else should have known. Hotel receipts appeared. Travel records appeared. Photographs appeared. Then came financial records. That was when the story became far larger than an affair. Savannah discovered hidden transactions spread across several years. Money had been moving through accounts she never knew existed. Expensive gifts had been purchased. Luxury vacations had been funded. Entire weekends had been disguised as business trips. Each discovery pushed the timeline further backward. 6 months became 2 years. 2 years became 5. 5 years became 8. Savannah eventually learned that Grayson and Harper had been carrying on their relationship for nearly 8 years. The betrayal felt impossible to comprehend. 8 years meant family vacations, where Harper smiled for photographs while secretly sharing a relationship with Savannah's husband. 8 years meant birthday celebrations, holiday dinners, and countless conversations built upon deception. Yet the deepest wound came from realizing how carefully both of them had maintained her trust. Harper had comforted Savannah during difficult moments in her marriage while hiding the truth. She had listened to concerns, offered advice, and played the role of loyal friend. Meanwhile, Grayson continued presenting himself as a devoted husband. Together, they had created a false reality and expected it to last forever. But the anonymous source wasn't finished. New evidence revealed something even more damaging. Money from marital assets had been transferred into investments connected to Harper. Business opportunities had been redirected. Financial decisions had been hidden. The affair wasn't simply emotional. It had become intertwined with nearly every major decision affecting Savannah's future. As weeks passed, Savannah transformed from a heartbroken wife into a woman determined to understand every detail of what had happened. She hired forensic accountants. She consulted attorneys. She gathered documents. The more information she uncovered, the more she realized that confronting Grayson immediately would have been a mistake. He had spent years building layers of protection around his secrets. Had she reacted emotionally that first night, much of the evidence might have disappeared. Instead, she remained patient. Grayson mistook her silence for weakness. Harper mistook her silence for confusion. Neither understood that Savannah was documenting everything. Friends began noticing tension. Family members sensed something was wrong. Rumors started circulating. Still, Savannah said very little. She understood that the truth would eventually speak louder than anger ever could. The turning point arrived during divorce proceedings. Grayson entered the process, believing he could control the narrative. He expected Savannah to be overwhelmed. He expected her to settle quietly and move on. Instead, he found himself facing evidence collected over months: financial records, messages, travel documents, property transfers. The picture that emerged was devastating. Friends who once supported him began asking difficult questions. Business partners grew concerned. Professional relationships became strained. People who had admired the image he projected suddenly saw a very different reality. Harper faced consequences of her own. Long-standing friendships ended. Trust disappeared. Opportunities vanished. The life she had carefully constructed began collapsing around her. For the first time, both Grayson and Harper understood the scale of what they had done. Yet the most surprising moment came near the end of the legal battle. By then, Grayson had lost much of what he once valued. His marriage was gone. His reputation had suffered. Financial consequences continued mounting. During one meeting, he finally asked Savannah a question that had haunted him for months. He wanted to know why she had never screamed at him, why she had never confronted him the way most people would have, why she had remained so calm after discovering everything. Savannah looked at him and gave an answer he would never forget. She told him that anger fades, evidence lasts. She explained that the night she found him with Harper, she realized there was nothing she could say that would hurt him as much as the truth eventually would. Years of deception had created consequences neither of them could avoid. All she had done was allow those consequences to arrive. Months later, the divorce was finalized. Savannah walked away with something she never expected to find after such a devastating betrayal. Peace. Not happiness. Not satisfaction. Peace. There is a difference. Revenge focuses on making someone suffer. Peace comes from no longer allowing their choices to control your future. Savannah rebuilt her business. She reconnected with people she trusted. She created a life that no longer depended upon Grayson's promises or Harper's friendship. Looking back, she often said the affair itself wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was accepting that the people she loved most had been capable of such deception. Once she accepted that truth, healing became possible. Years later, one mystery remained unsolved: the identity of the person who sent the first photograph. Despite everything that happened, Savannah never discovered with certainty who exposed the affair. There were theories. Some believed it was a colleague of Grayson's. Others suspected someone within Harper's circle. A few thought it might have been a person who had watched the deception for years and finally decided enough was enough. Whoever it was changed the course of 3 lives with a single message, one photograph, one sentence, one decision. And perhaps that is the lesson hidden within this story. Betrayal rarely begins with a dramatic moment. It begins with small choices repeated over time: a secret, a lie, a compromise, then another, and another. Eventually, those choices create a reality too large to hide. Grayson and Harper spent years believing they controlled the truth. They believed they could manage every detail and maintain every appearance. but truth has a way of surfacing when people least expect it. Sometimes it arrives through a conversation, sometimes through a document, and sometimes through a photograph sent to a woman waiting alone at a restaurant on her 20th wedding anniversary. Savannah once said something that perfectly captured the end of her journey. She said that Grayson and Harper didn't destroy her life. They revealed which parts of her life had already been built on lies. Once those lies disappeared, she was finally free to build something real. And if you found yourself in Savannah's position, discovering that your spouse and your closest friend had hidden a relationship for years, what would you have done? Would you have confronted them immediately? Would you have walked away without a word? Or would you have done exactly what Savannah did and allowed the truth to dismantle everything they worked so hard to hide? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story kept you watching until the very end, don't forget to subscribe, because our next story may be even more unbelievable than this one.